For 3,000 years, they ruled the greatest civilization on Earth, masters of gold, death, and secrets we still cannot explain. Their god-kings, the mighty pharaohs, held absolute and total power over life and death itself, worshipped by everyone as living gods walking here upon the earth. And they became obsessed with one single thing above all else, conquering death forever, carefully wrapping their dead as mummies to live on eternally in the next world. It all began around the year 3100 BC along the banks of the river Nile, a thin green ribbon of precious life cutting through a vast and deadly burning desert. To raise their towering monuments, tens of thousands of straining laborers dragged enormous blocks of solid stone across miles of scorching sand entirely by hand. All along the great river, a brilliant civilization suddenly exploded into life, with crowded, noisy markets, busy craftsman workshops, and thriving mud brick cities everywhere. They invented one of the very first writing systems in the world, covering their temple walls in thousands of mysterious, sacred picture symbols we now call hieroglyphs. Their master craftsmen shaped gold, precious stone, and bright jewels into dazzling treasures and towering statues of their many strange and powerful gods. At its glittering height, Egypt was the richest and most advanced civilization on all of Earth, its grand temples and obelisks lining the entire mighty Nile. At the very top of it all stood the Pharaoh, an all-powerful god-king whose every word was law and whose people bowed low before him in worship. The priests taught that he was a living god on earth, the very son of the sun himself, the sacred bridge between mortals and the gods above. He lived in unimaginable luxury and splendor, surrounded by servants, dancers, and vast riches, far beyond anything his ordinary people could ever dream of. Crowned with a double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, he carried the crook and flail, the ancient sacred symbols of his absolute divine power. His word alone commanded whole armies, raised entire cities, and moved mountains of heavy stone, for every single Egyptian existed only to serve their god-king. From his high palace, he gazed out across a vast kingdom of gold and stone, the supreme master of the greatest empire the ancient world had ever seen. But behind all of this dazzling glory, there lay a far darker obsession, one that would drive the Egyptians toward their strangest creations of all. The Egyptians worshipped hundreds of powerful gods, towering beings with the heads of jackals, falcons, and rams who ruled over every part of life and death. Masked priests of the death god performed dark and secret rituals, believing they alone could guide the dead safely into the terrifying world beyond. They believed that after death, your heart was weighed against a feather, and if it was heavy with sin, a monstrous beast would devour your soul forever. To please their gods, priests burned offerings and sacrificed animals on great stone altars as fire and smoke rose toward the towering divine statues. They carved powerful spells and terrifying curses into their walls, believing magic could protect the living and doom anyone who dared disturb the dead. On sacred festival days, enormous crowds of worshippers flooded the temples, carrying golden shrines and filling the air with incense and desperate prayer. And when the sky went dark and the sun vanished into an eclipse, terrified crowds fell to their knees, certain the angry gods were punishing them all. For to the Egyptians, death was not the end, but a dark and dangerous journey into a hidden underworld ruled by the gods of the dead. To build a single pyramid, tens of thousands of workers labored for decades, dragging blocks heavier than elephants up towering ramps under the merciless desert sun. One snapped rope meant instant death as multi-ton stones broke loose and came crashing down the ramps, and workers scattered in sheer terror for their lives. Brutal overseers drove the exhausted men with whips, and countless workers were crushed, broken, or worked to death, raising these monuments to their god-kings. Pushed to the breaking point, the desperate laborers finally rose up in fury, throwing down their tools in one of the first recorded strikes in all of human history. And the desert itself fought back, as monstrous sandstorms swallowed the site whole, burying men alive and blotting out the burning sun in an instant. Yet somehow, against every impossible odd, the wonder was finished, and the greatest structure on earth rose gleaming from the sand, built entirely by human hands. Deep inside, workers sealed the pharaoh's treasure behind massive stone doors and hidden passages, praying it would protect his body and gold for all eternity. But no tomb was ever truly safe, for in the dead of night, a lone robber slipped into the darkness, hunting the cursed treasure of the dead. Suddenly, the guards burst in, and the terrified thief was chased through the pitch-black tunnels, hunted like an animal through the twisting passages of the tomb. Dragged before the furious crowd, tomb robbers faced unimaginable punishments, for stealing from the dead was the darkest and most unforgivable crime in all of Egypt. When a pharaoh died, all of Egypt was plunged into terror and mourning, for now his priests had to win him eternal life in the world beyond. They began by pulling his brain out through his nose with a long iron hook, throwing it away, for they believed the brain was completely worthless. Next, they sliced him open and pulled out his organs, sealing his liver, lungs, and stomach inside sacred jars, but leaving the heart in place for judgment. Then they dried the body in salt for 40 days and wrapped it in hundreds of yards of linen, hiding magic amulets deep within the bandages. Over the finished mummy, they placed a glittering funeral mask, so the dead king's soul would recognize its own face forever in the afterlife. Then came a vast funeral procession, dragging the coffin across the desert as wailing mourners tore their hair and filled the air with grief. Into the tomb they piled unimaginable riches, gold, food, furniture, even servants, everything a god-king could possibly need in the endless life to come. Finally, the priests sealed the tomb forever, carving terrifying curses on the walls to strike down anyone who dared disturb the sleeping dead. And there the mummy lay, hidden in perfect darkness, its golden treasure waiting silently through the centuries as empires rose and crumbled to dust above it. For the Egyptians believed a terrible curse would fall upon any thief who broke the seal, a legend of death that still haunts the world today. Deep in a hidden desert valley, the pharaohs carved their secret tombs into the cliffs, guarded day and night to protect their treasures from robbers. Here a boy became king at just 9 years old, a frail young pharaoh who ruled a mighty empire before he had even grown into a man. But the boy king died mysteriously young, and he was buried in a small tomb in such a strange hurry that historians still argue over how he really died. Then his tomb vanished, buried under sand and rubble and forgotten for over 3,000 years. While grave robbers plundered nearly every other tomb around it. Then in 1922, an explorer digging in the valley uncovered a hidden stairway, leading down to a sealed door that had not been touched in 3,000 years. He made a tiny hole, held up a candle, and as his eyes adjusted, he saw the impossible glint of gold, whispering that he could see wonderful things. Inside lay the only royal tomb ever found almost untouched, packed with golden thrones, chariots and treasures, and a solid gold mask covering the young king's face. But soon, members of the expedition began dying strangely, one after another, and the world became gripped by terror of the ancient curse of the pharaohs. For nearly 3,000 years, Egypt had been the greatest power on earth, its god-kings ruling a golden empire of temples, riches, and unmatched wonders. But no empire lasts forever, and one by one, waves of foreign invaders stormed in, burning the cities and tearing the ancient kingdom apart. The last great ruler of Egypt watched her once mighty kingdom crumble, and with her fall, 3,000 years of pharaohs came to a final, bitter end. Foreign flags rose over the ancient temples. The age of the god-kings was over forever, and Egypt was swallowed into the empires of others. Over the centuries, the desert reclaimed its wonders, burying temples and statues beneath endless sand until much of Egypt's glory was lost to the world. Yet the pyramids still stand today, and we still cannot fully explain how our people, thousands of years ago, built such perfect, colossal monuments by hand. Their mummies still stare out at us across the ages, their painted tombs and mysterious hieroglyphs holding secrets we are only beginning to understand. Egypt gave the world its first great wonders, its gods, its writing, and its dream of eternal life, shaping human history forever after. And so the pyramids remain, silent against the setting sun, the last eternal guardians of the greatest and most mysterious civilization the world has ever known. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more legendary stories from history's darkest and greatest figures.